We're live. Woohoo. There you go. How are you doing, Paula?
I'm very well. And yourself,
You're
Renata?
good. I'm fine too. It happened with James just before, and with you now. I lost my notes, found it again. Good. Uh, like I said to you before, I have never done this before. I've never done live to Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube channel all at once. I find it so crazy that we can do that. I find it crazy, the whole technology of everything. And I love it, but I think it's great. And for a long time, I have thought about doing this more often and then thought, why would people then listen to the episode when it's released if I am recording it live? Does that make sense? But
Yeah,
I think I will add some reflection points at the end
mm,
of the episode. But why would you think people would listen to it twice? I don't know.
I'm not sure they'll listen to it twice, but I'm sure people have missed the first one and they want to catch up.
I think you're right.
Mm.
I think ideally what I want is to be in as many channels as possible because not everybody listens to podcasts. I am completely obsessed with podcasts. I love it, but I don't think I have many friends that listen to podcasts. Do you?
It's kind of a mix. I'm someone who wants to listen to podcasts, but don't find the time. I really want to. It's one of these things where it's like I need to just set them on. But yeah, I think it's a mix. There was a craze for a little while, but then people kind of listen to a few things in their own time, but then aren't really bothered anymore.
No, I am really obsessed, but I know not many people are. I think there was for this podcast, the job hunting podcast, there was a time when we launched that was really good for us.
Mm.
And then when the pandemic hit in March 2020, nobody was listening to podcasts because everybody was watching the news.
Yeah.
And for a few months, I'm like, where is everyone? You
Yeah.
disappeared. And then it slowly came back to
Mm.
the levels from the beginning. And then we've been growing ever since. But for a
Right.
moment there, I thought, well, I thought this was going to be a good podcast during a pandemic. But it turned out nobody was listening to any podcast. So that was a very interesting situation. So, look, everyone, today we're here to talk to Paula Baetu about psychometric testing, which is a very important topic for job hunters and people going through recruitment and selection. Now, Paula is the Chief Science Officer at TalentPredix, which is my favorite assessment. And she's also the Operations Director there. She's a business psychologist. And before coming up with the great TalentPredix assessment tool, you have been accredited by every single other assessment out there. Am I right?
That's what it feels like, yeah, about 10 or 15, I don't know, I've lost count.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. And I think it gives you then such great insight, isn't it, on what to look for when you are designing your own assessment tool with James Brook, who we've interviewed for episode 145. So your episode, in fact, is coming before James. Yours is 143. And so we're recording this live. If people are watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you can ask questions, you can comment. We may not see who you are, depending on which platform you are. You might come to us as anonymous. That's fine. Write your name if you want us to know who we're talking to. And you can ask questions. You can watch this now on any of these platforms, or if you want to check out how the episode will turn out after we edit it in the end, I'm going to add a few reflection points and action points to make whatever we've discussed, Paula, to make that um, a task oriented episode for people to then go and activate some of the tips and ideas that we shared. So I'm going to list them at the conclusion when I edit this episode. But why don't you give everyone some background about your career? Where did you start and why did you decide to become an expert in psychometric testing? Where did that come from?
Well, not dissimilar to most people. When I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just wasn't sure. There were so many different areas I was interested in: biology, psychology, geography. Just didn't have a clue. And what I did was I just started a general BSc at uni, because it kind of encompassed a lot of what I was interested in, but again, not really sure. I went to our the careers office and did some aptitude assessments to help me guide what I should be studying. They said I could do anything really, because my IQ was good enough and I was interested in a lot of different things. So that didn't help, which is kind of that first seed of psychometrics. That's interesting. And I probably walked out of that session, that feedback that I got after doing a full day of assessments, thinking, well, actually, the person whose job, the person who gave me my feedback, their job is quite interesting. So that seed was planted, and I was like, well, what kind of encompasses both things? So I was interested in biology and psychology most of all. So I made in South Africa, we got majors and minors, quite similar to the US system. I don't know what it's like in Australia.
Depends on the
Mm.
faculty. The
So
university is the same.
yeah, great. So I majored in psychology, general psych, and then I got to a point where it's like, well, again, I don't really know. So I took a gap year after my fourth year of studies. Did some temp work. I came to the UK, got some life experience, and then it was kind of just by chance that my sister-in-law's sister done psychometric assessment and specialized in that. And I was remembering that time I did the aptitude test, and it was quite interesting. And I did for my fourth year, my research study, I used some psychometrics, and I found that quite interesting. So I decided to do the specialization. In South Africa, it's a 6-month course and internship, where you pretty much working full time in a psychometric environment, learning all about it, and then you have to write a board exam and be registered with the Health Practitioners Council of South Africa. And I enjoyed that whole process, and I got placed with a fantastic company who taught me a lot around that, and then I got more into the consulting side of things there. But it was all kind of by chance and following little bits of interest. But like most, as I said, I just didn't know what I wanted to do either.
Do you was there a sliding door moment when you could have done something completely different? Do you sometimes look back and think, "Oh my God, I could have done that instead"? What was it?
It's not really sliding door. I think I realized in the time that this was not for me. So I actually, after my gap year, I came back and I was going to do a teaching degree. And I was sitting in the, I registered, I got accepted, and I was sitting in the registration day sort of thing, where the first day, and they were talking to us about the course and everything. And I turned to my friend who I'd applied with. She continued and finished, but I turned to her and I said, I can't do this. And I left. So I just knew in that moment that this is not what I wanted to do. Yeah, it was just about following what I felt passionate about and where I had the energy. And that's what I learned, going forward and into using psychometrics is about. You have to do what you're passionate about, what you love, because it's your life. It's day to day. It's so important. What you're doing is meaningful to you.
Yes, it's funny when you say passion. When I was interviewing James for the episode 145, so everyone, please watch that one when it comes out. He also mentioned passion because we were talking about grit. And this is the thing about passion for me personally. I followed my passion for my first 2 degrees and I didn't finish them because even though I was passionate about those topics, I didn't have the grit or the perseverance to develop the skill set to do those professions. I don't think I was necessarily talented, even though I still enjoy art history and civil engineering. Those were my 2
Mm.
first degrees. I didn't finish them. And I think it was really because of my lack of understanding of careers and what I could do. And also coming from a kind of an intellectual family that didn't have a lot of understanding of entrepreneurialism or
Mm,
commercial nows and, business. This was not something, it was not part of our vocabulary
mm,
growing up. You can work in the corporate sector and be a business person. It wasn't like how we grew up. So it took me a while to figure out that I could do a Bachelor of Commerce, which I then finished and loved. And, like it's really interesting that yes, I like art and I like history, but I don't want to sit all day doing research. It's not my personality to sit and do
mm.
research. And I think the psychometric testing can really help with that. Don't you think?
Yeah, 100%, because it's that intersection of what am I really good at, where are my skills versus what do I enjoy, what are my interests, and that intersection um, is usually the best career path. So if we do, and I used to do a lot of career guidance conversations and use psychometrics for career guidance, and you would have the interests, the personality, the ability, all coming together to then say, yeah, this is probably the career path that you should go into. Um, Probably better to do it in a process with a coach than unfortunately the assessments in high schools that tell you can become
Yeah.
an astronaut or a carpenter. Those don't really help people, because it's not. I think that focus more on interest only,
Yeah.
but it's so outdated and not useful. But if you get the formula right, then yeah, then we have
Uh-huh.
that mix.
That's great. And, like we were talking before about how I'm using TalentPredix, which you developed with James Rook. And as you know, I've been teaching it at university to,
Mm.
students doing master's degrees. And I wanted to share with you one of the ways that we've used it that I think was really fun. We read a quote from Amelia Earhart. I don't know if that was a good quote because she followed her passion and then she disappeared off the face of the earth by flying a plane over the Pacific. So probably I should choose a different hero next time, a different hero of mine. But I'm really passionate about her, and that quote, I will add it to the episode show notes when this episode goes to podcasting mode. It was all about loving the process of preparing for her adventure. She loved the process, and
Mm.
and we then looked at the Talent Predicts talent wheel that has lots of different talents that you have. And when you do the report, when you do the assessment, the report will tell you what your top talents are. And we tried to guess what her top talents were. And then we thought, okay, what if her top talents were these other talents? She would end up possibly becoming a teacher, teaching other people how to fly planes instead of being adventurous and flying over the Pacific. And we sort of chose different scenarios of people that
Mm.
love to fly, but then choose different career paths,
Mm.
different pursuits. And I think that that was a fun exercise to kind of
Yeah.
understand how you can all be doing a master's degree, let's say Masters of International Relations, but end up pursuing different careers because of that.
Yeah, I think in school you don't realize how many different careers there are, and the nuances. I didn't know that psychometrics existed until I'd already done 4 years of university, because it's just, there's so many different options out there, and they're changing every day, and there's more,
Yeah.
different jobs appearing all the time. Um, yeah, but with your Amelia Earhart story, I think it's great, and that's what I used to do in my role in consulting, looking at people's psychometric results, the battery that they've done, personality ability assessments, and then saying whether they were right or wrong for the role based on that. However, I think you gain a lot more if you were able to sit down and then have a conversation with her, a coaching conversation, to then see, how does that play
Mhm.
for her, the nuances for her. So I think it's great that we can generalize and we can say, yeah, you're likely to enjoy this this sort of job or career path.
Mhm.
But there are nuances for people in terms of
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
that
we need to get into that.
yeah.
That's what we're here for. But let me start with a very basic question about psychometric testing. What
Mhm.
does it mean? What is psychometric?
So a psychometric, as you break it down, is a psychological measurement.
Mhm.
It's measuring mental capacities or mental abilities, and it can be a number of things. So people, when they think psychometric, probably the first thing that comes to their mind is an IQ assessment, a typical one
Mhm.
that you see on a lot of films. So that comes to mind. But that's only one kind of psychometric. Psychometrics also involve personality assessments, other capability assessments, interviews, especially their competency-based or structured interviews. That's a psychometric. So anything that measures capacity or ability or personality is considered a psychometric, especially if it's got the research and the statistics behind it to say that it's reliable and that it's valid. So it's accurately measuring and precisely measuring what it says it's going to measure. So I
Mm.
wouldn't call these assessments on Facebook and online, that you answer some questions and it tells you what Disney character you are. I wouldn't consider that a psychometric.
Oh, got it. So, they will be measuring personality traits. Is that would you say that?
So some
In
psychometrics will measure personality traits. So it's a
Okay.
personality type assessments.
Yeah.
They can be measuring traits or type. So if we can start diving down into the detail, it can get
Yeah.
quite complex. But you have type assessment and trait assessment. These are just based on different models of personality. So we have people like Carl Jung and Sir Francis Galton, who's the father of psychometrics. They all had this idea around what is personality, what does it
Right.
look like, and they created a model, and therefore then created or people created tests based on that model.
Right. Are aptitude tests considered psychometric tests?
Yes,
And cognitive tests as well? They're
yes,
all
they're
psychometric.
all
Okay.
psychometric tests, and that's what I said. Even interviews,
Mm.
anything that's measuring that any capability is a psychometric test, as long as it, as I said, is still valid and reliable. Otherwise, I wouldn't
Yes.
give it that title.
So these sort of interviews that we often see in very organized organizations that have great HR teams that have all their questions on a table with some sort of scale, and
Mm.
that is also looking at doing an assessment that we call psychometric.
Yeah, because you're
Yes. Okay.
measuring it against you're trying to standardize the results,
Right.
and that comes down
Ah,
to being a
okay.
psychometric.
Okay. Now, before we move on and talk about the psychometric testing that happens during recruitment and selection process, which you have to do if you want to continue with that application and move on to the next phase, you could decide as a professional to just go and do a test like you did at university, like I've done a couple of times in my
Mm.
life as well. Um, what's the benefit of doing it? And which type would you do to help you if you're feeling lost in your career and you don't really know what to do next?
Okay. So with your point about for hiring and recruitment, I think the numbers are around about 75% or 80% of the top 100 UK companies are using psychometrics, and I think it's more in the US. So just to put that out there, that a lot of large companies are using it, and
Mhm.
more are using psychometrics. So I have to corroborate that statement that you
Yeah.
made.
No, we're gonna
But
look that into
yeah,
that.
um, the the idea of what you should try out, that you don't have to go and try out psychometrics beforehand. I think where it can help is if you just want to have a better idea about yourself and better understanding about what you might want to do in your career, because it's quite important that you're applying to roles um, that are in line with that. Otherwise, if you're applying to roles and you're trying to get into these roles that are not in line with your talents, your strengths, your potential, it's unlikely that you're going to be accepted into that role. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but especially where companies are using psychometrics as a screen out rather than part of the later part where you can then have a conversation around it. But yeah, you can go to a lot of career offices in universities. They're using some forms of psychometrics. I can't always say what they're using. They're just also say that there are thousands and thousands of different assessments out there. Some are good, some are not less good, some are outdated. But it's worth just, I guess, going through the steps, especially if you are stressed out or feeling anxious about having to go through psychometrics during the recruitment process. You could also speak to a career coach. I know I'm connected to quite a few, and I know there's some very good ones out there who can then also do that process for you if you don't have a career office. And then there are other psychometrics out there like ours, where you can go to the website and you can purchase a once-off assessment and debrief, which can then again just give you a bit more self-awareness and insight before going on that journey.
Yeah. And for example, what would be the benefit of somebody in a management position, a leadership position, to do an assessment like TalentPredix? What can they learn by doing an assessment like that?
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about the recruitment and the job hunting side thus far, but obviously psychometrics can also be used for development. And so it's on twofold. So as a manager or as a leader, if you're looking for a new role or a career change or wanting to step up in the organization, whatever it might be, then you can see the benefit of psychometrics, again, helping you find the right role and the right fit for you in the recruitment side of things, but then also from the development point of view. So you can use that same data. TalentPredix, we've designed it that you can use the same data that you've used. You've used it for recruitment. You can use it for your development process to then say, well, what are my strengths? How do I leverage those? And then what are my weaker areas? What are we call them potential performance limiters, which include your weaker areas. And those we're generally quite aware of what we need to work on. But then also, as James will mention in the next podcast, your overused or in excess talents and strengths. So when that dial's been turned up too far, and to be aware of those, which less people are aware of, because we think we're quite strong. We're in a certain area. Maybe it's teamwork. We're great at teamwork. I know that's something that's one of my talents. But when it's dialed up too high, then I might be very concerned about what my team's thinking about me, and not being able to necessarily move forward on my own because I need my team. So there are trip points that might happen that you might not be aware of, and then you can use that information as part of your development to say, okay, well, now I'm aware of what these blind spots are, my weaknesses are, and then start putting plans in place on how to develop those.
Yes. Now I'm really loving TalentPredix. And, before TalentPredix, the only other assessment that I used to do was the VIA character strengths. I'm going to put a link to both of them in the show notes. But I never liked any of the others. And I think it's because of my personal experience doing them. They never really gave me much insight. Remember when you said you did one at university and it came out that you could do anything? That's what I used to get. Or if it was some sort of quadrant, my dots will be in the middle, like so close together that it wasn't significant enough for me to think, I'm really more in this zone than any other. And I used to come out of those coaching sessions extremely frustrated with the results and not really getting much out of it. But I love using TalentPredix with my clients, and I'll give you an example what I think is great. two clients working in the same organization or the same type of organization, one extremely unhappy, the other extremely okay with everything. And once you get the report, you kind of understand why. So you would see one having, like, let's say it's government that they work in, one with precision as their top strength
Mm.
and leadership, and as a personal value, stability, right? The person is fine. I'm fine. I just want to stay here. And the
Yeah.
other's like, oh, I hate my job. And his top, uh, career driver is entrepreneurialism,
Yeah.
and precision is low. And, like, it's really interesting to see that diversity. And, I'm really loving also explaining how you can top up the talents you don't have if you're in a senior exec position, like many of my clients are, by hiring the right people.
Mm.
By using TalentPredix to also bring that balance to the team instead of you trying to be good at everything.
Yeah.
What do you think of that approach?
No, I think that's accurate. Again, when I worked in consulting, I had quite a large client, and we did the research at the end. We do research yearly, and profiling. What does their top talent look like? What does their leadership team look like? Based on the assessment they were using, and they were using Hogan, which is quite a well known
Mhm.
assessment that I'm also accredited in. Um, and what we found is that there was a lot of clones happening. People were hiring themselves, and there wasn't a lot of
Ah,
variance in the system,
yes.
where you just need. It's ideal to have this difference of opinion and different point of views coming in, or people that have different interests who can fill different roles, rather than having everyone be the same. And then there's
Mm.
either no challenge because we are clones of each other, or or you have people, for example, that are high on adaptability,
Mhm.
and that means that there's change for the sake of change in the system, and no one's challenging that, and therefore there's no progress because the precision isn't there and the organization isn't there.
Mhm.
So we can't just employ clones of ourselves. And this is why James and myself are talking a lot more about culture add rather than culture fit within an organization, and having that mentality. Who can I bring on to my team who can add, rather than who's going to fit into my team?
Yes. That's exactly right. And that's why when I am coaching clients, or even now, like for free here, I tell people, if you don't get the job, but you went through there are different bottlenecks and conversions during the
Mhm.
recruitment and selection process. Let's say it's towards the tail end. Don't feel bad, because
Mhm.
nobody wastes time with people they don't believe can do the job. I think that you
Exactly.
have to um, respect your competition,
Mm.
right? Other candidates will be great too.
Yeah.
And you're going to come in and you're going to have a conversation, and there will be several factors at play here. Many times, as a hiring manager, I didn't choose a candidate that I adored because I felt that this other candidate here had some complementary skills or strengths or something about them that I didn't have in my team. And as a smart boss, I'm like, I like you very much, probably because you're a lot like me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hire this person because I think we need this sort of skill set or whatever it is, to complement my team. So it's sometimes not really personal at all.
No, it's not. And this is I've done a lot of graduate recruitment intakes and apprentice intakes, and there you get thousands upon thousands of applicants, and it's a very difficult process. But when I've been able to work with those in the assessment center, which is usually the last step in the process,
Mhm.
for grads or apprentice intakes, I've always said to them, actually, you can use that this experience on your CV, saying, I got to the last stage of this graduate intake, even if you don't
Yeah.
get the role, because you've beat out thousands and thousands of applicants already to get to this
Yes.
point. So you have to think about it in that point. Even if you get to the first interview, you've already beat out a large number of CVs and other applicants to get to that
Yeah.
point. But yes, I agree about you then have to find the right person for the role, and you can't just employ someone you like. And this is why, we talk about how just using interviews is not a great predictor of performance.
Yes.
The more assessments and steps that you can add in, as frustrating as it can be for the candidate who's applying, if you're using a number of assessments and an interview and maybe an assessment center, you're going to have much higher prediction of performance at the end of the day.
Yes. We have a question here from somebody on LinkedIn. I'm not going to name names in case you want to remain anonymous, but I think it's an interesting question because they're asking, are there any free psychometric tests available? Now, there probably are. I'm going to answer that and then you can
Go for
step
it.
in. There probably are psychometric tests available for free out there, but TalentPredix is so inexpensive for somebody who is a white collar worker who is here on LinkedIn. It's actually so beneficial to have a very, high quality assessment spit out at the end of your 20 minutes that you're going to be doing this, right? So that you have this. It's a pity I don't have it with me, which was an oversight. I gave my personal report to my husband to read, which is something everybody should do. I think it's a great idea, and I don't know where he put it, but it spits
We
out
can
such
link
an
one of our sample reports, maybe.
Yes.
The
Yes, it spits out
recording.
like what a 20-page report, and it's such a great, amazing report that will give you so many outstanding insight that you can use as you build your pitch if you're job hunting, as it helps you talk about your leadership style, it helps you talk about the sort of professional you are. I would rather pay, and I will put the links underneath so you can go and purchase it if you want. Would you agree? Like, I don't think that there's
I would
anything.
agree. Our price point is very low for what you get,
Yeah.
because you're getting your talents, you're getting your career drivers, you're getting your values, you're getting your overused strengths, and you're getting some additional development information. And there's a lot in the report for a low price. What we generally do is, if you're an individual who wants to do the assessment, is we sell it in combination with a coaching session, which means that you're getting a fantastic coaching experience and
Yeah.
more information rather than just getting their profile. But even if
Yes.
you've just got the profile, there's a lot in there, as long as
Yeah.
you take the time to really work with it. But yes,
I'm I'm loving using it, like I said before, and both with one-on-one coaching, and as you know, I used it as part of my teaching at the university with 160 students and doing that analysis. I did it. Frankly, I'm just starting to use TalentPredix, and I really wanted you guys to be with me when I was doing it, but then it just went so well, the session, and I think that the students took so much out of it. And I think at whatever stage you are in your career, it's really beneficial to take some time and invest, what's really not a lot of money to get at least the report, if not the coaching session. And by the way, my husband is at the airport in Sydney, waiting for his plane and saying, yes, the report is with me. So I want it back. So if you're still listening, send
thank you
it
for
back to me.
watching at the airport.
He probably has nothing else to do. So with the psychometric testing done in recruitment, Paula, I'm going to share with you, as a coach, how I think the difference is, because you mentioned it briefly and I want to highlight it. When you are applying for a job and you send your application and the very next step is an assessment, it feels like it's more binary. Whereas if it's at the tail end, it feels like it's more like I want just to have an insight on who you are
Mm.
and not just, cut people off and use the psychometric testing as a cutting tool. in the selection process. Can you explain the sort of reasons why recruiters would choose, or maybe you don't know, but I'm hoping you can give some insight as to why some of them put it at the very beginning and others at the tail end?
I think it comes down to preference, but then also experience. So where I've used psychometrics at the get go as a screen out is when you're dealing with a lot of applicants. You need some way to lessen the pool, as it were, because for some graduate intakes for large companies, I've dealt with 40,000 applicants, so that sort of level. You have to whittle down the people to then put them into the next phase. As it gets costly, the further it goes along, and you can't run assessment centers with thousands of people. You want to get it down to maybe 100 and then run a number of assessment centers based on your smaller pool. So you can use it then. I wouldn't use TalentPredix as a screening tool. But you can use ability type assessments. So say the role is an accounting, or at an accounting firm or accounting level role, or you're employing analysts. So that sort of thing. You can plug in a numerical reasoning test or something like that at the beginning. So at least you're saying, well, we're only going to put forward anyone who's got average to more than average numerical reasoning for this role. Anyone who's scoring below average, we will reject at this time. Again, that doesn't mean that you can't apply again. We will understand that you might have a bad day. But where I find, where most people use it is then at the next stage. So when you're doing the interview, you will do the assessment, more, your personality-based assessment or something like TalentPredix. And then in the interview, you can then prompt questions around the information that you then have in that report. So rather than just using it as a screen out, you're using that information and being able to throw back questions to that person based on what their results have said. And then in the assessment center, if they're running one, then you're doing other types of psychometrics, which is your role plays and presentations or leaderless group discussions, which will then give you a bit more information about this person to then make your final decision.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. Like you, I haven't done graduate intake, but I've prepared graduates for graduate intakes, and preparing them to sit for psychometric testing is really important. But I have another comment here coming from Rachel, and I know Rachel is in human resources, and she said, I like to test up front so I can probe further in the interview. If it's at the end of the process, you miss that opportunity. And that's more the sort of clientele that I have, because my clients are mid-career to senior career, and they still have the assessment at the beginning. Sometimes, not always, because every selection process is different. And they're like, oh, they're going to cut me out because whatever I say. And I try to explain to them that in that case, I don't think so, because of the seniority of the level and the career experience being what you can see if the person would fit the role or not. I think for that, maybe the TalentPredix is a good assessment to have. Why would one use TalentPredix in recruitment and selection, considering what it's giving as an output is talents? Just letting people know it's your top talents, your career drivers, and your personal values, right?
So what I've advised people on is I personally, I know people do, but I personally would not reject someone or throw them out of the process based on personality results purely, especially something like values, because that again could be a value add to the company. I would use it, and this is what I've told people to use TalentPredix, is you use it in preparation for the interview, and then have, like Rachel said, then you can use that to probe further and get to know this person a little bit more and ask them more specific questions about if they're highly adaptable. Can you tell me about a time where you had to be highly adaptable, or tell me about a time where the situation didn't allow for you to make decisions quickly if they're highly decisive. So there are ways that you can just probe in that. I wouldn't use it for screening. If you are going to use psychometrics for screening, it would be in combination, as I said, with an ability assessment. But yeah, I've used too many psychometrics just for recruitment, where I've written a report and then I've said, oh, this person is a good fit for the role or a bad fit for the role. I've never spoken to this person, and I felt a bit strange about that.
Yes.
With just looking at psychometrics and not having a conversation and then making that decision. But if you're using psychometrics and then you're having the interview and potentially a role play or presentation for your managerial C-suite, they probably do a larger number of assessments. Then yes, you can start to make those decisions after that process.
Yes. And one thing that I commented with you before we started recording is the fact that sometimes I find that it validates what people already knew about themselves, and they feel like, yes, I own this talent. It's my talent. And I've been talking about it, and now here it is, the receipts that they say, but sometimes it spits out and it's not what you expected, and you get really frustrated. It happened quite a few times when sometimes leadership is not high enough, because my clients are, mid-career to senior, and they're like, oh, where's leadership? And the example I told you before was critical thinking. And critical thinking came low. For me personally, what came low, that I was like, oh, it was curiosity. And then when I started reflecting upon it, I'm like, yeah, I'm not that curious, to be honest. Like, I'm not going to spend time unless I am, asked to do it. Unless I have to, I'm not going to learn something entirely new out of the blue. I'm very purpose driven, and it has to, fit within what I'm trying to build for my career or for me personally. But it takes a while for you to accept the things you don't have as your top talents. Is that natural for you to have that response when you're coaching clients?
Yeah, so we have to remember that unlike things like presentations or role plays where someone else is scoring you, most assessments are self-report. So you are answering these questions about yourself. So it is, I would say 90% of the time, maybe 80% of the time, that you will get results that you expect because you've answered the questions. And the assessment, as long as it's measuring what it says it's measuring, then the output will be that. And that's where people go, well, I already knew that about myself. But it's sometimes useful to have it in a certain language or give you some development narrative around those results. But other times, I think there's a number of things that could be happening. The one is that we don't necessarily really know ourselves. So my example is I used to score very highly on empathy for every single assessment I ever did. It was one of my highest scores. I realized as I got into my late 20s, early 30s, I don't think I'm as empathetic as I think I am, or as I like to think I am.
Yes.
And that's it hasn't decreased because, as some of you might know, personality is something that's quite stable over time. It doesn't necessarily change a lot. And we can talk more about that. But if things do change, they tend to come down a little bit or go up a little bit. So mine's come down more to a slightly above average, but not so well above average compared to everyone else. And that came with life experience and just getting to understand myself better and getting feedback from other people, understanding that. The other thing that could be happening is when we talk about talents or strengths or personality in general, we're talking about underlying innate qualities that the way that we describe it is your underlying qualities that describe you when you're at your best. And these are things that generally come naturally to you. You gravitate towards them. But where there might be elements that don't fill you with joy and don't fill you with energy, you might have learned behavior around them. So another example that I've used, and you would have heard this before, Renata, is I tend to score very low on organization, very low. I don't like it. It doesn't fill me with joy. I'm not that, if you saw my desk around me right now, it's chaos. But I have a lot of learned behavior and learned skill that I've developed in that area. So when people meet me and they know me and I'm like, oh, I need to put that in my diary. I've got my notepad. I've become very organized because I've learned to be very organized. Even so, to the fact where I've been asked to mentor someone on helping them to be organized, which is fine. I can do that. But it's again where you might think, well, do I gravitate towards this? Do I have passion and energy around that area? Maybe like the critical thinking. Or is it learned behavior? Or maybe I don't know myself as well as I think, and there's some nuances in that. But we also can't get stuck in the numbers. So when we're looking at these reports, you're usually being compared to a group, to a comparison group, what we call a norm group. And when people say, oh, I'm extroverted, I might say to them, extroverted compared to who? Who did the report compare you against? Was it a global norm? Was it against other students? Who are you being compared against? And that might be, you might be getting an average score if the score is 1 to 10, and that score might be 5, and we might think that's low. No, it's average. It's you compared to other people, you are just as much of a critical thinker as they are.
Yes, that's very interesting because, here in Australia, we're a country of migrants, right? So we have people from different backgrounds and they have come to Australia at different stages as well. And I often, and I've raised this with James in a conversation with him before, I've often have this concern about their cultural background and where they come from and how they were raised, where they were born, how that may influence the results of a psychometric test that they do. And I've had more than once dealt with really difficult situations at work with clients that are Europeans in Australia or Asians in Australia, or even myself, frankly, at work doing some sort of psychometric test and analysis, and then being not considered for promotion or something that was underway based on their actual day-to-day performance. Then the test kinds of pull that lever back down again. Have you experienced that? Because I have, and we had to create a whole narrative as how they were going to talk to their managers about this, and how people from a Germanic background tend to answer questions, or some people from Asian backgrounds wouldn't say that they are like this or like that, because that's not part of their culture.
We don't want to stereotype, but it's exactly that. It's part of the culture. So some communities are going to be more ambitious and more driven, and other communities are going to be more centered around people and values. And that does change potentially not necessarily a lot, but it does change the comparison. So what the average is of the group. So this is a big issue in South Africa, for example, and this is where I was trained and where I was brought up. Because a lot of the assessments that were developed in the 60s and 70s, the norm group, the comparison group, were white, upper class, those that had access to education. That was the comparison group, probably more males than females even. And then you're comparing your large community with many different cultures and values and upbringings to a group that is nothing like you. Your results are not likely to be accurate. It's going to say that you are well below the norm on some things and well above the norm on other things. And it's not actually then a valid and reliable tool to be using. So you have to be careful about the assessments that you're using, that they have being backed up by research that's up to date. They're not using outdated research from the 60s and 70s. And yeah, I think people need to be careful, but then also know that assessments don't mean that this is set in stone for you either. I think that's also important to talk about, where if the assessment says, well, I've got average drive or low drive, that doesn't mean that that's you. You can't then use that as an excuse. Well, I don't have drive, so I'm not going to worry about getting, bother about applying for a promotion. This is where psychometrics are used inaccurately to be that to say this is you. No, this is how you come across, and this is how you compare to others. But you can develop these things. You can build the skill around them. And this is, again, why I wouldn't reject someone based on a personality assessment from a job process.
Paula, how can you prepare for a psychometric test if you're doing it through, like, doing a recruitment process? Do you prepare? Or what would you recommend?
There's nothing that you can do to prepare. For most assessments, personality-based assessments, there's no right or wrong answers. It's all about being just your authentic self, being honest about who you are. Usually you just need to go with the gut feel answer, because that's more likely you, not overthink it. So there's nothing you can do to prepare for those. With the ability type assessments, you need to have a certain level of numeracy, if it's for numerical assessment, or verbal reasoning, or a certain level of English for those sort of assessment. You can do training, and there are practice tests for some of these. I know one of our competitors, they've got practice tests online, so you can go look if you know what the kind of assessment that you're going to be doing. Ideally, the hiring person can tell you. So you can ask them, or you're asking me to do these assessments, can you tell me a little bit more about them, or who the developer is? And then you can do a little bit of research. But with most of these, you can't do too much preparation, but that's okay. You should feel okay about that.
You should just feel fine and relaxed and not nervous, and do it with intention. I have clients, especially those that do it as part of their work. They just do it, let's say, on an evening, because they're so busy and they don't pay attention to what they're saying, and just ticking the boxes in a hurry. And then the result spits out, it goes to HR, and it makes their life hell.
Yeah, if you talk about preparing, yeah, if you're talking about mentally preparing, yes, then yes, you need to have, ideally, most of the time we say do it in the morning when you're at your freshest, especially if it's a cognitive ability assessment. Do it in the morning. Don't wait till the evening when you're tired. Do it when you're the most energized. I mean, for some people, that might not be the morning, it might be mid-morning or early afternoon, but don't do it too late in the day, or when you tend to feel really tired. And for any of the other personality assessments, just take a breath, be in a good state of mind. If you're stressed or trying to portray something that you're not, that's not going to be helpful to you or the hiring person at all, because you're not going to show who you are. And a lot of these things aren't timed either. So if you feel like you're getting really freaked out about it, just take a step away, go get a drink, go for a walk, and then come back to it. So those are some things that you can do just to feel calm and relaxed about the process.
And final question, if I do TalentPredix again in 2-3 years' time, will it have changed?
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but talents or personality traits don't tend to change a lot over time. So the talent element, you might find that what we call secondary talents, the ones that are just below your top 5 talents, some of those might pop up, other ones might pop down a little bit. You might find those small changes. Personality doesn't tend to change unless you've experienced some sort of trauma or some big life event. What you might find change is career drivers, especially if you're currently early on in your career, because you don't necessarily quite know right now what drives you. You might find as you grow up and as you have kids and get married, then balance, which is one of our career drivers, might pop up a little bit more. or stability. Or maybe you realize I'm actually someone who wants to run a company one day, and then entrepreneurial spirit pops in, but that's not necessarily something you thought about when you're early on in your career. So those things might change a little bit, but as you get more settled into your career, you know yourself better, you kind of set on your career path, then those are also less likely to change. But what we usually say is the test retest reliability, so the chances of the test being significantly the same if you did it again in 2 years. For personality tests, that's usually 18 months or so, the validity drops. So so then you should redo the assessment, because there might be some small changes, and it just might be that the initial one isn't as accurate for you anymore.
Okay, that's good advice. Paula, thank you so much for joining me today for this chat. Thank you so much. And I hope to come to the UK soon to see you and James. I am loving using TalentPredix for my clients. I think that they're really, really liking it too. It gives us so much content to talk about, to work with. It's really been very transformational in my coaching. So congratulations and thanks again for doing such an amazing job with TalentPredix.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Renata. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to hearing some more feedback and for more people to use it. We're quite a young, dynamic company, so we want to get that feedback and more and more people using it, and getting our norm groups, bigger norm groups around the world, and we're expanding globally. So it's great to have you with us, and thank you very much, and thanks everyone for listening.
Bye.